All right. So, hello everyone. I'm here with Mike. No, not Mike Joe. Mike Joe. Tell me how you pronounce your last name.
Pillow.
Pillow.
Like Joe Pillow.
That's right. I remember this from last year when you explained the origin of the pillow.
Well, it would be cultural appropriation, although we are all permeated by Amiga things. No, I use Joe Pillow because, but he's listening to me now. I can't. So, the first time I went to the show and I registered with my real name and I paid and he sent me the money back. So I sent it again with Joe Pillow. And that stuck.
So here we are with Joe
Mike,
Pillow.
You know, Mike Battilana.
Yes, yeah. I want to talk about your interview with Jay Miner before we do anything else, because I had no idea that you talked to him.
Well, this room actually reminds me of the developers conferences we had in the 80s and 90s, Amiga developers conferences. And although Jay Miner was already at some distance, he wasn't involved, like most of the California team wasn't as involved with the Westchester team as initially they were hoping to, the Los Gatos team. But Jay Miner was still invited as a VIP, and at a couple of events I met him. And I also remained in touch with him because he was running a BBS, and
Jay Miner was running a BBS.
Yes. And we had Cloanto, and we wrote some software to support the color fonts on his BBS, which was very innovative at the time.
Oh, sure.
So you could do by changing with some control characters, and so there was a way to use multicolored text in his BBS.
Oh, and what was this running on?
I don't remember.
But this is pre-Amiga, right?
No, it was Amiga.
Oh, it was Amiga.
Yes.
Okay. I thought it might have been on the Atari 800 or something.
I can ask my colleague what hardware his BBS was running. Mm-hmm. So I cannot exclude it was Amiga, but I could say.
You think it was?
Right now, he was El Padre in the BBS, and what was the BBS? Memories.
It's been a couple of years.
Yes. I should have prepared better for this. I didn't know you were going to ask me. So I interviewed him in 1990 at the Paris Developers Conference.
Okay.
And it was on an analog recorder, not something fancy like this.
Oh yeah, like the Zoom.
And the battery was going down and down and down. And so when you listened to it later, it was like Mickey Mouse at the end. But another friend, Luca, was able to with digital tools, restore. And actually, that's the interview that is on Amiga Forever also.
Oh, okay.
That's the one I did in 1990. So we talk a little bit also about computers and society and other topics, not just.
Did you get
Amiga.
the feeling that he was really passionate about what he did?
Oh yes. He was passionate and respected.
Yeah. Who are some of your computing heroes?
Well, I grew up when there were a few computer magazines.
Yeah. Remind us where you're from originally.
Well, I am from the northeast of Italy, just where the Alps begin. My mother's German, my father is from Trieste, which is also in the northeast. And at the time, without internet, you went to larger towns to see their bookstores. So I used to go to Munich, Germany. They also had Amiga computers at almost half the price compared to Italy. So that's where I found the first Amiga books. When I saw the first Amiga, it was all in Germany. And in those years, every month there was something exciting coming out, being announced in the computer magazines. So every month there was better sound, color, resolution, everything was exciting. And a lot of the products by Commodore were exciting. I started with a PET CBM.
Did you have, which model PET did you have?
It was an 8032.
Okay, so you didn't have one of the ones with the crazy keyboard.
No,
Okay.
that was the 2001.
Yeah.
So my father's company needed that to do some work, but it was just sitting there on a table. It was too precious, too important for me. It was unreachable, but after a few months, there was no software. And so I wrote the software, and so I learned to program and everything, and it paid for itself. It did what it was supposed to do, but I wanted to do like also some games like you saw every year when the fair, like the Luna Park fair comes in town, and again every year, like the magazines, every month show you some new computers coming out from this or that company. Every year you see new games coming out. Initially they had these colored screens, and they were actually black and white, and then slowly you had larger bitmaps, vector, color, and other things. And I was trying to imitate some of those, but whenever I finished writing a game, it was so boring. So some people would say, "Oh, cool," but for me it was boring.
You were ready to move on to the next
so
thing.
I was dreaming in color. I wanted whatever. I was lucky to have a VIC-20 at some point. I exhausted the memory and went back to the PET, and then the Amiga came out.
What do you think about the architecture of the PET versus the VIC-20? I mean, which one?
They're very similar.
Yeah.
I mean,
because in my mind, I think about the VIC-20 being light years ahead of the PET, but really they weren't chronologically, right? They were sold almost concurrently at the beginning, right?
Well, the proof for that is that I, already being quite technical, I was programming in a machine language on both. So on the VIC you had better sound, of course. You could program like the character bitmaps and use that for graphics, but the resolution was much smaller. And I started, even if I was fascinated by color, for example, I realized that my eyes were suffering from it, from that small resolution. 80 columns was a luxury, 32 kilobytes was a luxury. I went back to that. That was true productivity,
Right.
which if you were like into writing, word processing, or whatever tools, things were responding faster then,
Right.
and they made more of a difference in your life then than they do now.
So the PET had 80 column right out of the box.
Yes.
Okay.
The 80 to 32.
Yeah.
The 4032 had 40 columns. Yes. So, but all of these, the VIC-20, the C64, the PET, CBM, in a way they were packaged well in a right time, I think, when again I come to these magazines, they were writing stories about similar companies doing similar things and fighting each other. Of course, Commodore had in-house also silicon development and manufacturing, but I saw the Amiga as more of a revolutionary thing when it came out in '85. So that was for me already with a Commodore imprinting. When the byte cover story came out, I said, that's the one.
Yeah.
It was the best hardware, the best software by Commodore, and so for me it was a clear choice. But I had to wait a bit because it came to Europe in '86. So in the meantime, going back to the bookstores, I was studying C and the Addison Wesley books and the Bantam book. So I learned to program in theory before I got on Amiga.
And were all these books in English? Were any of
yes.
Oh, so you,
No, the C book I had was a German one, and the others were the English.
okay. So really, do you think that? I mean, it's amazing to me as an American that you'd be able to parse such a technical book in a language that's not your
Oh
own.
no, that's well. I was learning English already back then in elementary school, and also by the PET CBM. I really learned well. There was a machine language book and a basic book, but also I had Raito West's programming the PET CBM book, which went really down to
the
teach
metal.
me things that I didn't even know, like do sound with the tape output, or use the keyboard interrupt to do multitasking, things like that.
Yeah.
From the Commodore manuals, you wouldn't expect you could do that. So, yes.
So what was the first real thing that you programmed?
It was from my father. It was customer. Not customer relationship management, it's a bit too much, but you could attach some information to customers, update that, print labels to do mailings, and things that were done manually before, and it had to be reasonably fast, not lose data, and so I learned about databases, binary trees, and all these things that came. So whatever you could do with 2 floppy drives, and printer, and with that limited memory, I filled every byte of it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, and for fun, I tried to imitate the arcade games.
What was the first one that you tried?
Well, probably like the snake or the submarine dropping things. And then on the VIC-20, I did like a Space Invaders.
Oh, okay.
Because there you could modify at the pixel level.
Right. Now I know with the Atari, the Atari has player missile graphics, is a sprite engine. What is on the VIC-20?
Right. Well,
it was all sort of, it wasn't ASCII, but there was no real character generation,
first,
right?
I must confess, I never did. You could use PETSCII on the 80 column. Later, I saw that some people really used that very, very well, even to do like Space Invader-like thing. No, what I used on the VIC-20 to do the Space Invaders game, you could modify the character font bitmap. So I was modifying the bitmaps of the characters to do the graphics.
Oh, okay.
Then,
you could actually combine characters together to make pictures.
Well, you put A, B, C, and you can modify the A.
Because it was a 16 by 16 basically.
It was more like 5 by 7. I don't remember now how much
it
it was.
Okay.
Then I experimented. I mean, budget was tight. I didn't have a C64, but some friends had it, and because first I was dreaming in color, but then I also was dreaming advanced things like sprites.
Yeah.
I wanted to try that. I did some things with sprites, but at my friends. And then also on a C16, I remember it had like polyphonic sound. They dropped sprites, regrettably. Maybe it was a reason for being incompatible and not successful as it could have been. But so the +4, the 16, and all these series, I tried those as well. They had better audio, in my opinion. They had a more advanced BASIC.
Right. In fact, I think that the C16 had a better BASIC than the C64, didn't it?
Yes, you could do polyphonic audio and many other things. Yes.
Now, did you always try and code in machine language when you could, or did you?
No, I learned it. I learned with Rayto West, I think. So initially, I was doing BASIC. And then I also for doing sound and graphics, it could only be done that way. So
why is that?
Because it was faster. Because I had more control of some lower level things, which.
Yeah.
So I put.
You mean in machine language it was faster? Okay, right. So let's move on to when you started with the Amiga. How did you get involved with doing things sort of at the professional level on the Amiga?
Yes, I think. Sorry, J-BBS was the mission. I could be wrong.
That's okay.
Now
That's okay.
They keep flashing. So, in 1986, the first software I wrote was. I was into text processing because that's what I also was doing a little bit on the PET. And I was experimenting with that, and I was approached by an association and also by some parents of children which had physical handicaps and also blind, or some couldn't talk. And the Amiga was a perfect match because at a fraction of the price of existing systems, you could have analog input, speech synthesis, graphics, outputs, and so I wrote some software like a communication system where you could use custom-made input hardware done based on the specific special needs. Like now you see Microsoft did an Xbox controller where you can put in different ones. So we were doing something similar with Amiga using the joystick.
So you
inputs.
Guys were really ahead of the game in terms of accessibility.
Yes, but nobody wanted it because it was an Amiga. It should have been. So Commodore Canada told me, every school in Canada has it. But
that's not a huge. When you look at the total market, that's
But I didn't even know. But in Europe, it had to be IBM PC compatible, which was a problem that even Apple had back in its day.
Absolutely.
So for me, it was a high motivation. And after a while, the software was given out for free. So it had speech synthesis, which I did. So back then, I already could see blind people setting the speech synthesis speed so fast because imagine you have a physical handicap, you cannot see. That's one application. And so you want feedback of what you have been writing, also commands, options going back to you when you select. And I was surprised by the speed they had set, because you could set the speed of the speech synthesis. And now I see again a similar thing with modern applications. There's people, even developers, who don't have a screen but only use the audio, and
maybe you can just parse it at a faster speed through your
5 or 10 times normal.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
So, and we did custom hardware and the graphics output, and so it was a fraction. So let's say it was 1/5 of the price of what you would pay an Apple II with similar speech synthesis and input at the time. But so those who had it really appreciated this, both for the technological superiority and for the price. But schools wouldn't be able to. They would not be able to use it, not in Europe.
Yeah.
So, but then I wrote a word processor to go back to your question. I never wrote games on Amiga. For me, Amiga was, as a user and as a developer, always about productivity. So I wrote a word processor, which went well. So it was.
And what was the name of that?
Personal rights in English, or C1 text in Italy.
Okay.
It had a few more features for Italian management of accents and legal paper and other things. It was fast even on a low-end Amiga, like on a 600. It was sold as bookware. And then came, also as we grew with more developers, Personal Paint, which was itself the evolution of a fonts editor.
You were able to take what you learned with your experience editing fonts and put that into...
Yes, and not just me, but at the time, remember, the first... If you wanted quality text output, they were the first 24 dot printers. I mean, dot matrix printers, impact printers, or even 48. I think there was a Fujitsu one, which was like that. The best way to have a laser-like quality without the laser price was to download a font to the printer.
Okay.
And we could do that. You could decide how the dots would overlap or not overlap when you were designing the fonts. Or some limitations, like you cannot fire the same needle twice in a row, or things like that. And so it worked well with the word processor, which was text-based, and then we added color fonts. I had a good relationship with Cara Blom, the California artist who did color fonts and then anim fonts. And so we developed this also together. And hair fonts were very used on TV, and then Commodore embraced the format as well, for Amiga for the color fonts. And then out of the color version of the fonts editor came Personal Paint. And in those years, Deep Paint and Personal Paint, but they were precursors even to Deep Paint. They had all a similar interface. They had either on the left or on the right, you could select the tool. And
sort of what we associate with Photoshop now, right?
Yes. So we were among the first to support AGA and RTG modes, and for that reason, and not only that reason, we were included then in Commodore bundles, and those were good years.
Right. So you were ahead of Deep Paint in terms of AGA,
Yes, briefly. So we had some catch-up play to do onion skins, layers, morphing. They had some very good features, but we would work with less memory and with RTG and AGA before they did. I remember we had a prototype Picasso 2 board, so we were at Commodore's booth at the shows, and then slowly also with David Pleasance and Colin Proudfoot and Jonathan Anderson at Commodore UK. We did the bundles, and then also with Commodore Germany.
Do you know exactly why? I mean, what do you think the reason was that you guys were included in the bundle? Were you offering less of a cut than, say, the folks at Deep Paint were to be?
Yes. So there's two reasons I've been told at the time and later.
Okay.
One reason, well, I wish I was Electronic Arts. You asked me who were the people I admired.
Sure, yeah.
Chuck Peddle, who recently passed away.
Yes, yeah, just a couple weeks ago.
He definitely was a person I admired. I was following his Victor Sirius, also machine, which he did after the PET, and I was dreaming about that. It was like a better version of the PET.
Let's pause and talk a little bit about that, because I've never heard of that before.
So, well, you're asking me, it feels like an exam now, things like which are more than 30 years away. So the Victor Sirius had, remember, I went back from the VIC 20 as an early teenage years. I decided that the business series was better for my eyes, for my productivity, and so it's something that I understood by myself, because the small television, the TV output was ruining my eyes, and I just could express myself, create better on the PET. But the Victor Sirius, which was Chuck Peddle's other company he did in the UK, I believe, was offering better pixel precision graphics, so you could program the pixels, better sound. I think you could even do speech synthesis back then. It had so many advanced features, but it was too expensive, so I could not afford it, of course.
I see.
But it's one of the things I was reading in the magazine.
Yeah, I've never heard about that. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. So, Electronic Arts was a company I also was admiring. I remember when we still had compulsory military service, both in Italy and in Germany. And I was thinking, if you had a contract to work abroad, they wouldn't call you. And I was thinking, Electronic Arts could be a nice company, because I had met some people when they came to Europe, and so I was admiring them
back then.
So, what was the name of yes, he was a major shareholder, and Trip Hawkins?
Yeah, Trip Hawkins.
Okay. So he was one of the investors of an Amiga competitor called 3DO.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Commodore didn't like that too much. Mm-hmm. So that was one reason.
Okay, makes sense.
And Electronic Arts made some of its first millions with those bundles. So it was important, like it was good money for us.
Yeah.
So as an Amiga developer, I saw the best of times, but then also brutal collapse.
Yeah.
So it was a chain reaction, because we had outstanding payments that were owed to us, and could have bought a house probably. That's what I always say. So when all the distributors closed, so we saw the best and the worst of times. Mm-hmm. And that's why it helps me also relate to the situation now. We are not fighting for crumbles, like some say. I have seen the peaks. Mm-hmm. It's not comparable to that. I do other software now for a living. Mm-hmm. So back to the second reason of why we might have replaced the bundle of David Pleasance also mentioned. They thought they could demand more and that there was no competition. That's and Commodore didn't want to have a gun pointed to the head. That's what I heard. So there were these two reasons, told by different people, one at the time, one later.
Well, both of those could be true in their own way.
Yes, but we also were the first who had AGA and RTG. But we had a very cordial relationship. I remember at a DEF CON, it must have been 93, when Personal Paint already was out. I remember meeting the D-Paint developers, and I'm still in touch with Lee. And I remember when in the emulation we needed help to do the pressure-sensitive support. She helped, and so we took group photos also with the developer of Brilliance and with Photogenics, and we always met at Amiga events. There was no enemies or so.
Yeah.
So we were all friends.
Well, before it looks like we're getting ready to get started, so I can talk to you the rest of the night. Before we wrap up, what can you tell us about the latest developments in the lawsuit?
So, two things. I have to see the good side of things, and I see the solution and not the problem. The problem is something that in part has been ongoing for 15 years. We just inherited it. Some things were never defined well, and they needed to be resolved. It was just waiting to happen. A good thing that happened last year, also because of the situation, is that Amiga Inc. decided to sell, or better, the shareholders decided to sell. And so I think we're beginning to see more change now, an opportunity now, than again in the past. When did they incorporate and get the assets from Gateway? In 1999, I believe. So now our acquisition company, which has an ugly name for now, and we can have another session just about naming, has all those rights. Of course, I still would love to solve also the legal mess that's here. It's very ugly. It's a shame, especially because we have seen completely different times, and it's not worth it to be in the Amiga for a fight. But I don't see the problem. I see the solution in my head. I see beauty and possibilities and open source and making more possible and eliminating some fights which are not good. So that's, and there's been also a lot of support. Of course, I love the difficult questions too. That's why I'm here and not only here. But so I hope that 2020 can be a positive defining year. And 2019 already saw much more change. When we spoke 1 year ago, I must mention this, there was no such good microphone, so we had a great session, and it was a few weeks before we signed the acquisition on February 1st. I knew some things. I was still hopeful, but until the day we signed, in Chicago they had a polar vortex at the time, on February 1st, and the law firm had the office closed. And already there had been delays, and they kept the office open just for us to sign this. That was February 1st, and we met in January.
Yeah, that's right.
I couldn't say much because there wasn't much to say. But now still, I can say this, the acquisition was completed, but before we can put the things together, we need a solution to the legal case, to the ugly legal case.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Mike, we're going to be here all weekend together. They're getting ready to start things up here, so we've got to cut this one short. But let's catch up again, and we can go and we can work through this stuff, because I want to hear, I want to hear about that in more detail.
Thanks for making it for the second year in a row. For you, it was a longer trip.
Yeah.
For me, from home to the bus to Athlone, it was 6 hours.
Oh, that's almost nothing. So, well, Mike, thank you very much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
All right.